Risk Management Professional exam preparation course, Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis. In this video, we will explain the Perform Quantitative Risk Analysis process. The video is divided into the following topics: purpose and objective, critical success factors, tools and techniques, and documenting the result. And again, tools and techniques is the key area for those who's pursuing the exam. So let's first look at where we are in the overall project risk management process landscape here. So perform quantitative risk analysis. So what we are going to look at here is numeric models, combined outcome, confidence limits, sensitivity analysis, prioritized list updates. So let's first look at the purpose and objective of the quantitative risk analysis process. So first is numerical estimate of the overall effect of the identified risks. We look at statistic models are used to provide realistic estimates. Quantitative analysis does not replace qualitative analysis. And to further stress this, the quantitative analysis add to the qualitative analysis. So the result of the quantitative analysis will answer some important key questions, such as what is the probability of meeting the project objectives? How much contingency reserve is needed to provide the organization with the level of certainty it requires based upon its risk tolerance? And note the word risk tolerance here. That's again the key when we are talking about stakeholders and organization, and it goes again throughout, which is why this is so important to understand for the exam, as well as understand if you're going to implement the PMI project risk management process. Okay, back to the list. So what are those parts of the project, such as line item cost or schedule activities, which contribute the most when all risks are considered simultaneously? Which individual risks contribute the most to overall project risk? So I think now a lot of you might have a question: what is actually the difference between the qualitative and the quantitative analysis? So let's try and address that question now. So qualitative addresses individual risk descriptively. It assesses the probability and impact on project objectives if risk occur. Prioritize individual risks, and it updates the risk register. So what it also do is that it leads to the quantitative analysis. So the quantitative analysis predicts likely project outcome on combined, and mark the word here, combined effect of project risks. Use probability distribution analysis, risk probability and impact. Requires tools. So this is a very statistically or numeric analysis, and you will need tool support. Some is very expert tools and some is very simple models. What it also does is it estimates likelihood of meeting targets. And finally, it identifies risk with greatest effect on overall project. So with that understanding of what the difference are, now let's have a look at the critical success factors for quantitative risk analysis. So there's a number of success factors. The first one is prior risk identification and qualitative risk analysis. Again, it builds on top of the qualitative risk analysis. Appropriate project model, committed to collecting high quality unbiased risk data, overall project risk derived from individual risks, and finally interrelationship between risk in quantitative risk analysis. So let's look at them one by one. So prior risk identification and qualitative risk analysis. So here we try to put a short illustration. So really what you are doing is you are doing risk identification, then you do your qualitative risk analysis on top, and then you do the quantitative risk analysis. So as mentioned in the objective, quantitative is the next step on top of the qualitative. You identify the risk, perhaps you have an initial response, then you analyze the risk, what are probability, impact on individual risk level, and then you go into the quantitative risk analysis and you see what does these risk means to my project. Moving on to the next success factor, so appropriate project model. So an appropriate project model must be used as the basis for the quantitative risk analysis. And project models most frequently used include project schedule, cost estimate, and decision tree. And the quantitative risk analysis is sensitive to the correctness of such project model used. Committed to collecting high quality unbiased risk data. Again, like in the qualitative analysis, we need to make sure we collect of high quality information about risk is required. And the information might not be available in any historical database and needs to be gathered through interviews, workshop, or from expert judgment. Any data gathered from individuals might be subject to bias. Overall project risk derived from individual risks. So here we are looking at the quantitative risk analysis is performed based on methodology that correctly derives the overall risk from the individual risks. And the appropriate method for such analysis are examples: Monte Carlo simulation for cost schedule analysis, decision tree for decision-related risks. Overall risk is derived by combining the probability and impact from all individual risks. Interrelationship between risk in quantitative risk analysis. So here attention is required to the possibility that individual risks could be related to each other. For example, individual risks could have a common root cause. So listing the risk in the risk register, including root cause definition, can aid to correlate the individual risk and to see if there is a common root cause across the risks. So that's the success criteria. And now let's look at the tools and techniques based on the PMI input tool technique output formula or format. So we have 5 inputs here and we have 3 tools, and then there is really only one output, and that is that we now build on top of the risk register, so we will have a risk register update. So let's look at the inputs first. So 5 inputs, and they are risk register, risk management plan, cost management plan, schedule management plan, and organizational process assets. Risk register is given. This is the risk register from the risk identify process and is the key input to the quantitative risk analysis. It was updated as we went through the qualitative risk analysis and will be now further updated as we go through the quantitative risk analysis. Risk management plan, which is our Bible, it is the key input again to the quantitative risk analysis, just as it was to the previous identify risk and the qualitative risk analysis. It was made in the plan risk management process, and this is what you need to remember for the exam. Cost management plan. The cost management plan defines the format and criteria for planning, structuring, estimating, budgeting, and controlling project cost. And what the project cost controls will help with is to determine the structure and approach for the quantitative analysis of the risk impact to project cost and budget. So again, the quantitative risk analysis is to quantify the impact. To quantify the impact, you need to understand the cost of your project and how cost is managed, and that is what the cost management plan gives you. Likewise with the schedule management plan. So the schedule management plan defines the format and criteria for developing and controlling the schedule. And likewise for the cost, here the quantitative analysis will based on the input schedule management plan, determine if any impact to the project schedule. Finally is the organizational process assets. So organizational process assets can influence the risk management plan in areas like information from prior and similar completed projects, studies of similar projects by risk specialists, risk databases that may be available from industry or proprietary sources. So this is some of the assets. It's not all the assets, but any organizational assets that can help influence the risk management process should be considered. So with those inputs, let's try and look at the tools that we're going to apply to do our quantitative risk analysis. So we have three main tools listed from the PMI model. One is data gathering and representation techniques. So different information data gathering techniques supports the data gathering for quantitative risk analysis, such as interviewing, probability distribution. Here, this is exam questions, so those of you who's planning to take the exam needs to pay attention to this. Quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques. So here, different quantitative risk analysis and modeling techniques is important to ensure both an event-oriented and project-oriented analysis approach, such as sensitivity analysis, expected monetary value analysis, and modeling and simulation. Again, this is very relevant for those who's taking the exam. And finally, expert judgment. So again, use of experts with relevant experience from similar projects can be used to identify cost and schedule impact from risks. And as we used them before to identify risk, prioritize risk, we can also use them here for the impact assessment. And experts can also be used here in the quantitative risk analysis for interpretation of data and use of tools. As I mentioned earlier, there is a number of experts tools. So having experts there for interpretation and data and use of tools, including selection of the right tool for the analysis, can be very helpful and is often recommended. So the experts have a wider role here, you can say. Okay, so bringing us to the output. So the output is really the risk register update. So the updates should include probabilistic analysis of the project, probability of achieving the cost and time objectives of your project, overall project, prioritized list of quantified risks, as well as trend in quantitative risk analysis results. So if we look at this is in a little bit summary chart here. Basically, we had the risk prioritization. Now we assess the interrelationship between risks. We collect high quality risk data. We use a project model, and all of that is what goes into the perform quantitative analysis using tools such as Monte Carlo simulation, decision tree analysis, etc. And the output is the result, which will be updated in an updated risk register. And what the result will answer is how likely is the project for success, contingency needs, as well as high priority risks. And the high priority risks are those that is impacting overall project or has a large number of risks linked to it. So documenting the results. So the output after the quantitative risk analysis is really two things. It's one, update the project cost estimate with calculated contingency reserves required for addressing the risk or having a buffer if the risk happens. Update the risk register and communicate the analysis result to project stakeholders. So that's the main output. And again, the output itself is to update the risk register. With that, let's do a summary. So after completing this video, you should have a good understanding of the performed quantitative risk analysis process.